Record slip, we are back in session. Parties and counsel are present. All members of our attorney or alternates are present. After the jury recessed, but before everyone else recessed, spent a little bit of additional time with the attorneys and with Mr. Carter, and I determined that everything that was to be asked of Mr. Carter had already been asked. So we finished with Mr. Carter and excused him, and then people may call your next witness.
We'll call David Jackson, please. Come on, please.
Do you solemnly state the evidence you'll give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Please state your full name and spell it for the record.
David Jackson, D-A-V-I-D-J-A-C-K-S-O-N.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jackson. How are you?
Good, how about you?
Not too bad. Our apologies for keeping you waiting. You were here first thing in the morning, right?
That's correct.
Drive all the way up from San Diego area?
That is correct.
How was traffic?
Not too bad.
So I need to direct your attention back to February 8th of 2010. Where did you work at the time?
I worked at the San Diego Village shopping mall.
And I take it that's in San Ysidro?
That's correct.
And who did you work for?
Bruce Carter.
And,
the company's name is Sentinel Protective Services.
and what was your job with them?
Security enforcement, just safety and making sure the parking lot is secure and safe.
To kind of cut to the chase, we heard from Mr. Carter before lunch about the two parts of the shopping center. You're familiar with those?
Yes, I'm correct. Mm-hmm.
And on February 8th, 2010, were you at work as a security guard in that shopping center that day?
Yes, I was.
What was your shift?
That day, I believe, probably was either 6 to 11 or 2 to 11. I'm not really sure the whole, sometimes I did 2 to 11, sometimes 6 to 11.
Okay. It's been a while, I take it.
Yes.
You didn't happen to keep a diary or a calendar to say, oh, I worked this shift that day, right?
It was 8 years ago, it's a long time ago, so.
Almost 9. Okay. And are you familiar with another security guard? And again, I'm going to blank on his name again. Last name of Murray.
That is correct. That was my coworker at the time.
James? John?
Yes, James W. Murray.
Okay. And Mr. Murray, I guess, passed away a couple years ago?
Yes, 2015.
And on February 8th, 2010, did you work with Mr. Murray that day?
Usually what happens is, even if I work till 11, Mr. Murray always comes in a little earlier. So we both kind of like, he kind of walks around with the rest of my shift with me until I finish my shift. That way, you know, he kind of already knows what's going on before he starts his shift.
Okay. Seems prudent. So on that day, you would have been ending your shift towards 11 o'clock, and he would have been taking over from 11 o'clock on?
That is correct.
I'm assuming you're meaning 11 o'clock at night?
Yes, at 11 p.m. that night. Mm-hmm.
That was my next question, Your Honor. Sorry. So you would have worked till 11 at night. He would have gone 11 into the next morning.
That is correct.
Okay. And on that day, at some point, did you notice a white Isuzu Trooper parked in the parking lot of the shopping mall?
That is correct.
And do you recall when you noticed it?
I would say usually, depending upon what day it is, a lot of the stores close at 9. So we do our best to try to check to see, due to the time frame of how people shop late at night, we try to check a couple hours before the stores close to see if we notice any vehicles that kind of just sitting there and see if anybody just maybe abandoned them or just, you know, they're not shopping. So that's, I'd say that day probably about 7 o'clock.
So let me ask you first, I'm going to show you a series of photographs, and they're marked 134, 135, 136, 137, and 138. Is that the white vehicle you just mentioned?
Yes, this is the white vehicle.
And were those pictures taken at or about the time that it was going to be towed?
That is correct.
You want to change it for a minute? Okay. Change it for a minute for me, I appreciate it. Apparently I'm not the only one with technical difficulties.
Okay.
We didn't power it up apparently.
Okay.
While we're waiting for that to come up, let me ask you a couple questions. You didn't personally take these photographs, did you?
No, when we tow vehicles, it's the tow company that actually photographs the vehicles. That way, in case something happens, they have evidence to present whenever the people come and pick up the vehicle.
And those photographs, one of which the first just came up on the screen, they have a date and a timestamp on them. You see that?
Yes, I saw that. That's correct.
To the best of your recollection, that would be fairly accurate to the time it was about to be towed?
Yes, that's correct.
And in fact, in the back of this photograph, it's better to see on the screen over there or maybe here, in the back of Exhibit 134, you can actually see the back of the tow truck. Is that what that is?
Yes, that's correct. That's the back of the tow truck.
Leading.
Oh, that's right.
135 is the side, right? Same car, correct?
That's correct.
Same car on 136,
Yes, that's correct.
137,
Correct.
and 38 is the front.
Correct.
Is this common practice when you'd have a car towed?
Yes.
Do you remember approximately where in the parking lot this car was being towed from?
Yes, at the time there was a store called the Pink Zone, and there was a store also called the Sunrise Buffet. It was kind of about, I'd say probably about 3-4 parking spaces across from the store that I mentioned.
I'm going to show you Exhibit 139. Does that look, what's in that photograph look familiar to you?
Yes, it does.
And how does it look familiar to you?
Because at the time working, those are the stores that we had, and that's the area that we patrol.
So that's accurate to 2010.
Correct.
And you mentioned the pink zone that's depicted in this photograph.
That's correct.
And it's a little washed out on the screen, but you can see it a little better on the back video monitors and maybe on the monitor in front of you.
Yes, I can see a little better on
Do you see the approximate area from which that trooper was being towed that night?
it. Let's say... Looks like about the third or fourth car over, somewhere in that area.
Okay, so I have the best that we can do it with a kind of washed out screen. It's not going to show up there. Can you use this laser pointer on this big screen and give us the general area in which you're talking about? You got to push the button. No, right here. It's the little one on the top. Right, that one right there. Nope. Right there. There you go.
Somewhere right about this area.
Okay, so when I'm looking, I'm going to look at the big screen to make sure I get a good image of it. You're pointing to an area. Let me do this. Let me have you turn around for a second. Since it's a dark photograph, let me get a sticky note. I actually have one right there, but I was going to do something different. I can give you a silver Sharpie, thanks to Mr. McGee.
That work.
If you can circle the general area, unless you know precisely of where that car was. Okay, that worked not too bad. put it on the camera. Project. Kind of, you can see it on there, but not real well. But that's your marking on there, that kind of silver circle?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Thanks, sir. So the photo was about 11 o'clock-ish. 11:08 or 11:01?
1101.
Okay. And that was about the time you remember it being towed?
Yes, because what happens is usually we observe it at a certain time, then we have to give a certain time frame before we call the tow company, and then they arrive, leave the pictures, and then tow it off property.
And you mentioned that in part that was dictated by the stores closing
That's correct.
and waiting a period of time before towing it?
Yes, that way we ensure that we know that all the shoppers who were in the mall, see if they, once the mall closes, there's no more shoppers, so we make sure that, in order to try not to make a mistake, we make sure all the shoppers are gone before we authorize the tow.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as exhibit number 140, and it's the second page. And I don't know if you recognize this or not. Please tell us if you do. This document that's page number 2. Do you recognize it?
I do recognize it.
And how do you recognize it?
Since I was with Mr. Murray that night, I also assist him in making sure that the tow slip is filled out correctly.
Okay. And does that tow slip refresh your recollection at all as to what time the vehicle was observed?
Yes, it does.
And what time is that?
21:18.
So 9:18 p.m.?
Correct.
And what time was it cleared for a tow?
It was authorized at 22:19.
So about an hour later?
Yes.
So 10:19 p.m. And what time was it towed?
It says here it was time off property 23:05.
Okay. That does not tell you when the tow truck was actually called, does it?
The time authorized is the time we actually called the tow truck.
Okay. And obviously if an hour goes by, it doesn't show up immediately.
Right, that's correct.
Now we heard from Mr. Carter, and tell me if this is true. Your duties are divided between these two big lots with a lot you're not responsible for in the middle. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And it was just you that day, correct?
Yes, until Mr. Murray showed up. That's correct.
Is it possible that that trooper came into that lot at some point and you just didn't notice it come in?
Objection, speculation. Sustained.
Did you see the trooper come in?
I did not see the trooper come in.
And if you didn't see it come in, you never saw anyone leave the vehicle, right?
That's correct.
Did you ever, at any time during the day, even at 9 whatever o'clock, did you ever see anyone return to that vehicle?
No, I've never seen anyone near the vehicle.
Did anyone that day come up to you and claim that vehicle? Where'd my car go?
No one ever claimed the vehicle. Like I said, no shoppers. The whole mall was clear.
Okay. So, other than the observation time that's on the tow slip, can you sit here today and tell us with any certainty what time that car came into the lot?
The only thing I can tell you is, like I said, usually if vehicles are grouped together, you kind of notice them a little bit, but you kind of really don't notice anything until once the mall closes, which was 9 o'clock.
There's a lot of cars in that parking lot, right?
Sometimes, yes, that's correct.
And they don't stick out like a sore thumb until there's really no cars in the parking lot, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Nothing further, thank you.
Cross.
Just briefly, do you still have exhibit 140 up there? The tow sheet?
No, it's right here.
Let me show you page 2 of exhibit 140. The section on the right. That is the tow sheet that's filled out for Western Towing?
That's correct.
And is it the duty of the people employed by Sentinel Security that fills that out?
Yes, we do.
Now, was that sheet filled out by you or Mr. Murray?
Looks like part of it was me, and then part of it was Mr. Murray, because since of his age, he kind of, certain things he can't really write too well, so I fill in certain parts, and then he fills in certain parts.
And which parts did you fill in based on looking at your handwriting?
Looks like I put in the address, the truck driver, and also the company name.
And so the times would have been put in by Mr. Murray then?
That's correct.
It seems like one of the times, two numbers were written over on the time, was it authorized or towed, time towed?
Time off property is what it was.
And do you know if you're the one that did that or if it was Mr. Murray?
What happens is, I think on that day, sometimes based upon when the tow truck driver was getting ready to leave, Mr. Murray might have made a mistake. So when the tow company calls it in and they verify everything, they double check to make sure that the time was correct. And it looks like Mr. Murray accidentally put in a 2 instead of a 3. So they wanted to make sure that was correct.
So there was a correction from the time from a 10 o'clock hour to the 11 o'clock hour when it was removed from the property.
Correct. Only because it looks like Mr. Murray, like I said, due to his age, he was writing a 2 and meant to write a 3 actually.
And you were present when he was filling that out?
That's correct.
Now, you testified that when cars are grouped together, you generally don't notice them. Is that an accurate kind of summary?
Not really notice, it's hard to see which ones are what we call considered abandoned because they're no longer shopping. Because usually, people park, in big groups. So then once the store's closed and you see just one vehicle, it's kind of obvious.
It kind of stands out like a
Right,
sore
that's
thumb.
correct.
And sometimes certain cars may stand out that you may, oh, look at that. Like a red
Well,
Corvette.
the only reason why a car might stand out is maybe there might be something funny looking about it when you observe it. Let's say, like, for instance, maybe you might notice, like, the windows cracked or somebody might have accidentally left the trunk partially open, something like that. Then you would be like, okay, well, there's something going on with this vehicle. Let's wait a little bit, see if we see anybody goes to it, and then we'll, if it's still here, then we'll authorize it to be towed off property.
And so, at no time was there anything about the vehicle that was towed, the white Isuzu Trooper, there's nothing that you recall that stood out that made you notice it before that 9 o'clock hour?
That's correct.
So you couldn't tell us any time it got there. It could have been there all day, could have been there for 5 minutes, you don't know.
That's correct.
I don't have anything.
Any member direct?
One question. You were interviewed by San Diego Police Department, or San Diego Sheriff's Department back in 2010, weren't you?
That's correct.
Okay, nothing further.
Anything else?
No, you're
Any objection to Mr. Johnson being excused?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your attendance, and you are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And you call your next witness.
Roll call, Kathleen Conwell. Do you solemnly state the evidence you'll give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
State your full name.
Kathleen Conwell, Conwell.
Can you spell your first name also?
Kathleen.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, or actually good afternoon, Ms. Conwell. In 2010, who were you employed by?
San Diego County,
In what capacity?
Animal Control Officer,
How long had you worked for them as an animal control officer?
21 years.
Are you still working for them?
No, I retired in 2013.
Well, Congratulations on your retirement. And what were your duties basically when you worked in animal control?
I was the field officer, so I was assigned areas to patrol and enforce animal-related laws.
Did you work primarily out of one office?
Yes, Carlsbad.
And there are several offices throughout the county, is that right?
At that time, there were 3, yes.
Okay. And the Carlsbad office, would that be considered the North Region?
Correct.
And on February 14th of 2010, did you respond to the location of 3473 Avocado Vista Lane in Fallbrook?
Yes.
Why did you go to that particular location?
We had received a complaint regarding abandoned animals on the property.
And the caller that actually had made a complaint, did they give you any specific information?
Yes, I called and spoke to the reporting party, and he told me that a brother of the party that had abandoned the animals had been going door to door in the neighborhood trying to
No, so just information, you spoke to the reporting party, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and as a result of that conversation that you had with the reporting party, did you respond to the residents?
Yes.
What time was it that the call actually came in on February 14th?
It actually came in around 3:30
And when did you first go to the residents?
at 19:04, so it would have been 7:40.
Did anybody go to the residents with you?
No.
And given that it was February at that time, was it dark when you went to the residents?
Yes.
And did you notice any vehicles in the driveway of the residents?
Yes.
What vehicle did you notice?
There was a Dodge pickup.
Do you remember the color of it?
I do not.
Sure. And when you see that Dodge pickup in the driveway, did you do anything to try and identify who it belonged to?
Not initially.
Did you do that later on at
I
some
did,
point?
yes.
What exactly did you do to determine who the truck belonged to?
I called the sheriff's department and ran the license plate to see who the registered owner was.
And who did you find out was the registered owner of the vehicle?
Joseph McStay.
Now, from the location that you were at, which I'm assuming is in front of the house at first, is that right?
Correct.
Were you able to determine if there appeared to be any other vehicles that were parked in front of that residence that you believed belonged to that residence?
No.
No, that was probably a bad question on my part. No, you didn't do that, or no, you didn't see any?
No, I did not see any.
Okay, and I'm going to show you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 20. Do you, by any chance, recognize that at all?
I don't.
Okay, it's been,
8 years, yeah,
Okay.
it's been a long time.
but you did describe a Dodge pickup in the driveway, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you arrived at that location, what was it exactly that you did?
I went to the front door. The first thing I do is go to the front door to see if anybody's home. And I noticed, well, I went to the front door and nobody responded to my knocking. So then I went to the south side of the house where there was a gate leading into the backyard, and I opened the gate because dogs were barking, and I could see 2 dogs in the backyard.
Did you enter into the backyard?
I did not. There was a large male Rottweiler cross dog that was guarding his area. So I could see a shed there, and I could see blankets. So I knew they had shelter at that point. So I backed out. I probably was in the yard, maybe a step into the gate, and then I backed out and shut the gate.
Saw the dog, turned around and hightailed out?
No, I just need to further look into this.
Okay. After you backed out of the backyard, what did you do next?
I met with a neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, who
Where did she live in relationship to the house that you were at?
I believe she lived on the north side, immediate north side of the house.
So next door neighbor?
Yes.
Okay. without telling us what the neighbor said, did you get some information from her in terms of contacting somebody?
Yes,
Whose contact information did she give you?
the brother of the owner,
Would that be Michael McStay?
correct.
Now, when you responded to the location and you drove up, you indicated that you saw a truck in the driveway and you went up to the front door. Did you notice if there were any lights on inside of the residence?
No, it was dark,
And you indicated you knocked on the door, is that right?
yes.
And it sounded like you were about to say something, that you noticed something at the door.
There was notes left on the door,
What do you remember about the notes that were left on the door?
asking for Joseph to contact various people.
Okay. Now, you indicated that you spoke with Ms. Anderson and you got some information from her for Mike McStay. Did you reach out to Mr. McStay and call him?
I did. I called and left a message on an answering machine for him to give me a call back.
Did you call anybody else?
I did.
Who did you call?
I called the Fallbrook Sheriff Station.
And did you speak with somebody at the Fallbrook Sheriff Station?
I spoke to a dispatcher.
And what exactly did you tell them?
I asked for a welfare check to be conducted at that location.
Now, did you wait for the sheriff's department to actually arrive to do the welfare check?
No.
Why not?
My phone rang, and Michael McStay called me back, and in our conversation, he informed me that he had contacted the Fallbrook Sheriff's Station, and they had done a welfare check earlier that week. So while I'm talking to him, I got on my radio with dispatch to cancel that welfare check. And at that point, my dispatcher told me that the sheriff had already contacted her and said they had been there, confirmed they had done a welfare check, and had found nothing amiss.
Did you get any information about when that welfare check had taken place?
No, I'm talking from a dispatcher to a dispatcher, so
Okay. Now, when you go out on calls, if there's not somebody at the residence, do you do anything to alert them that you were there?
yes, I post, depending on what I find, there's different notices we post.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 582. Can you tell me if you recognize that?
Yes.
What is that?
It's what we call a calling card, or an ACD-29 from the County of San Diego. It's basically letting an owner know that we responded to a complaint at their house and to give us a call.
Okay. And that's the one I showed you.
582.
Showing you the exhibit that we just talked about, and you indicated that you recognize that. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Now, Ms. Conwell, there's a date on there of January 31st of 2010,
Yes.
and what you've testified to is that you were at the house on February 14th of 2010. Can you explain this discrepancy?
It's an incorrect date, obviously. A lot of times I fill these cards out with the date and my signature at the bottom, just for speed. As I'm posting, I write down the activity number and what I need the owner to do. And obviously this one got past me. Wrong date.
Okay, so the date that you were there was actually February 14th.
Yes.
Is there anything about this notice, or this calling card as you've referred to it, that you can actually look at any reports that you've prepared to verify that this is the same incident?
Yes, there's an activity number on it above the incorrect date.
Okay, and when you go to a residence, do you prepare additional notes that you refer to, I believe, as an activity card?
Yes.
And what do those notes consist of?
It's an investigation. It's what we found, who we talked to, what we did, and what actions may need to be followed up with.
And if I could just show you your notes from that day, they're not marked as an exhibit. And you indicated that there's an activity number on this card that we're looking at. right in
Yes.
front of you. Is that the same activity number that's on your notes?
Yes.
Okay. And so from this activity card that we see, we gather that somebody had called you, a neighbor or someone in the neighborhood had called and said that the dogs had been abandoned. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, did you hear from, or I'm sorry, where do you leave this actual notice when you are at the house?
I left 2 notices there. I left one on the front door and one on the side gate where you would enter where the dogs were at.
Okay, and I'm going to show you what's been marked as 128 for identification. And I apologize because you're not actually going to be able to see the note, but is that the one that you believe you left on the door as well, the gate? I know it's really hard.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this is the notice that you actually left, is that right?
Yes.
And when you left this notice, is the gate actually open?
It is there, yes.
Okay, do you know where the dogs were at that time?
When I posted the notice, the dogs were in the backyard.
Okay, would this notice also have been posted on February 14th?
Yes.
Okay. Now, were you contacted by anybody else after you had been at the residence that day?
Yes.
Who were you contacted
I
by?
was contacted by a, I'd have to look at my notes here, sorry.
Would it refresh your recollection to look at your notes?
Yes, I have a copy of them. I was contacted on February 16th by a Detective Sandy Curry.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question about that because, like you said, you prepared this activity card, correct?
Yes,
And then if the date on here says you were contacted by that Detective Sandy Curry on February 6th, is that also an error? Okay,
oh, yes, it should be the 16th, that's a typo, yeah.
okay. And did you speak with the detective that day?
I did.
Did you speak with anybody else related to the case after that?
I did. I spoke on 9/15/2014 with the detective Eddie Bachman.
Okay. Do you know ultimately what happened with the dogs in this case?
Well, Michael McStay picked the dogs up and we took them back to his house. I assume they went to his house.
No further questions?
Cross.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Conwell, you said you spoke to Michael McStay, correct?
Yes.
And you talked about the circumstance at the house?
Yes.
And Mr. McStay and yourself discussed something about the sheriff doing a welfare check.
Yes.
And did you inform Mr. McStay that you had already requested a welfare check?
I don't recall if I did. I remember canceling that as I was talking to him.
And you said Mr. McStay informed you that one was already done
Yes.
or one was already called in?
No, one was already done, and the sheriff's dispatcher confirmed that.
Now, did the sheriff dispatcher or anybody explain to you the date that occurred?
No.
Now, you've been an animal handler, or excuse me, somebody worked for animal control for 21 years.
Yes.
As part of that 21 years, were you trained how to handle animals?
Yes.
And I assume trained to handle all types of animals.
Yes.
And your part of that training would also be to recognize friendly versus dangerous animals.
Correct,
And in your 21 years, I'm sure you've had to use that at some point or another.
correct.
At some point, do you also utilize the use of like the rod with the
Catch
lasso?
pole, yes,
And so you've had to use that on numerous occasions.
yes,
Have you had to interact with animals that were endangering other humans?
yes,
So if there's a wild dog on the street attacking kids, you have to come and capture the dog.
yes,
Have you seen how dogs will react to certain circumstances, or trained how animals will react in certain circumstances that can heighten their protective nature?
Objection, relevance. Vague.
Sustained.
I'm trying to establish expertise on animals.
That's for these particular dogs?
No, just general animals.
The objection sustained on relevance.
Let me ask you this, Ms. Conwell. You saw the dogs in the backyard, correct?
correct,
There was a small puppy
yes,
and a larger dog.
yes.
And you remember the larger dog being, what type of breed did you think?
The Rottweiler mix,
And what kind of mix would have been with the Rottweiler? Any idea, or just?
I have no idea.
And when you say Rottweiler mix, what kind of physical characteristics do you identify with that? Like a head shape, body shape?
Body shape, sure, yeah, they're a big dog, they're as tall as they are wide,
Okay.
yeah,
And you said when you went to look over the fence, that dog was appearing protected.
yes,
If a dog of that type that you saw, do they like to attach onto owners? Like if,
Objection, speculation.
Sustained on relevance, grounds evidence for 352.
well, can I be heard as to what are relevance of what we're going for?
No?
If the owner of that dog, or a dog like that, was attacked in front of that dog, in your experience, do you think, or in your opinion, would a dog of that nature help defend the owner?
Objection, speculation, relevance.
Roll the rules, please. If she has an opinion.
I do have an opinion because I own Rottweilers. I have one, Roddy, that would, yes, probably jump right in to help, and I have two others that would probably run for the chicken coop.
So it's each individual
It's a
animal.
very individual thing, yeah.
So you can't say just by looking at the dog whether or not it would jump in to help, but it could.
I could answer.
When you spoke to Mr. McStay about the welfare check we discussed earlier, did you ask him who actually requested the check, or did he inform you of that?
I believe he told me he requested the welfare check.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Just briefly, regardless of who requested the welfare check, you were informed by the sheriff's department that a welfare check had already been conducted on that home. Is that right?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Anything else?
No, Your
Any objection to Ms. Conwell being excused?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you for your attendance and your excuse. And you can call your next witness.
If you want to call Sergeant Michael Tingley, please.
Do you solemnly state the evidence you give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
State your full name and spell it for the record.
Michael Tingley,
Tingley.
Spell your first name,
as well, please.
Michael.
Thank you. By whom are you employed, sir?
San Diego County Sheriff's Department,
And how long have you been employed by the Sheriff's Department?
approximately 12 years.
And what is your current rank and assignment?
Currently, I'm assigned to San Diego Sheriff's Department Valley Center Substation as a sergeant, patrol sergeant.
And did you somewhat recently promote to that rank?
Yes, sir.
And when was that?
Approximately a year and a half ago.
I want to go back in your career to February of 2010. Where were you assigned then?
Then I was assigned to the Fallbrook Substation in San Diego County
As what?
as a patrol deputy.
And what are the general routine duties of a patrol deputy assigned to a substation such as Fallbrook?
You would respond to any dispatch calls, any radio calls, 911 calls. You would conduct patrol in neighborhoods, traffic-related incidences, missing persons, assaults, domestic violence incidences, anything called into our dispatch center.
And at the time, or even if it's still currently, you can tell us, if you as a deputy were dispatched to or sent to a call involving something really serious, such as a homicide, a kidnapping, a bank robbery, did you tend to hand off that assignment to someone else at some point?
Yes, we have protocol and policies set in place for certain incidences. If it's a homicide, deputies would respond to the incident, secure the scene, call out our homicide team. If it was a child abuse incident or a sexual assault and it fit the criteria for our sexual assault team or child abuse team, the same protocol would stand. The deputy would respond, find out the details of the case, and then contact a detective.
With a special unit?
Yes, sir.
In that case, what would it be?
In this case, as far as
In the case you did, like, it was, I think, a child
like it
sexual
was a
assault.
sexual assault, child abuse case, you would contact our sexual assault on-call sergeant, who would then assign a detective to respond to your location.
And as a patrol deputy, was it your practice to err on the side of caution and at least check with those specialized units before continuing further in any type of assignment?
Yes, anytime that we feel that the case is a potential chance to go to that unit or a specific unit, we always encourage our deputies to err on the side of caution and call and find out if they're going to be responding and or what their wishes are. Sometimes they actually request for us to continue and that they would receive the report the next day and handle the follow-up as required. Sometimes they choose to actually come out and handle the scene right there, and they will give you instructions over the phone.
So in those general situations where they come out and do take over, what is your job then at that point?
You stop. As long as your conversation on the phone with that detective that's assigned to the case, essentially will be assigned to that case, they will tell you, go ahead, lock the scene down, and secure it, and we'll be out. And that's exactly what you do.
And when they get there, what happens?
Once they get there, you will do what's called a brief. The whole team will get there. If it's a homicide scene, the whole homicide team gets there, homicide sergeant. They will gather around. You will give them a brief of the situation and your response. Generally speaking, it would be the nature of the call, how the call came in, time that it came in, what each deputy did, who entered the premises, the residence or the area that you have deemed to be the crime scene, who's entered, who's exited. You would give them all the pertinent information to the case. They would ask you any questions that they may have, and then they would resume the investigation and relieve you of your duties at that scene.
And once you're relieved, what do you do?
Once you're relieved, you go straight to the station. It's changed now because of the LBC, but back then we would go straight to the station, write your report because they need it that day or that night, and then that would be approved by a supervisor and forwarded to the specialized unit. And now we download our BWCs immediately so that they can review the BWC.
What is a BWC?
So it's a body-worn camera. All of our body-worn cameras now.
So back in 2010, you did not have body-worn cameras.
No, sir, we did not.
Okay. So if I can summarize that and tell me if I'm wrong, once you're relieved and submit your paperwork, you wash your hands of it, you walk away, you have no other involvement.
Correct.
Unless some DA 130 miles away calls you to testify in a trial.
That is correct. We have no involvement with it once it goes to specialized investigations.
Okay. So I want to go back to February of 2010. On February 15th, 2010, did you somehow receive a call regarding a desired missing persons report?
Yes, sir.
And how did you get that call?
I believe essentially it was a radio call. I believe it was a 1021, so a phone call. And I contacted the reporting party via phone.
Okay. So what's a dispatch call?
So a dispatch call is when dispatch will come across, for example, my call sign as of today, as we speak today, is 92 Paul Sam. Adam, they would come across 92 Paul Sam Adam. I would say, go ahead. They would say, missing person, 1085 2nd Street, and I'd say 10-4 en route. That's a radio call. If it's a 1021 call, they say 92 Paul Sam, 1021 missing person via 1021, via phone call. And I would say 10-4. We either drive back to the station, is what I like to do, and make the phone call from the station, or you can make the phone call from your work cell phone.
Okay. And so how does stuff get to dispatch in order for them to tell you that information?
A lot of times, whoever's calling in the call for service will contact San Diego County Sheriff's Department dispatch via the public line, or they contact 911. If they call 911, it's routed to our 911 dispatch center, and then the dispatch center has a call taker who will take the call information, and that gets routed to our actual field dispatcher, which then will dispatch it to our units. And that's the same route that it goes for the public line, it's just not the 911 line.
That sounds like a lot of layers.
It is, sir.
Okay. So back on February 15th, 2010, you received a dispatch for a missing persons call.
Yes, sir.
And you recall that being a 1021, a phone call rather than an in-person or a scene.
I believe so, yes, sir.
So what did you do?
I contacted, well, first I had my partner, I'd have to look at the report exactly, but I do believe I had my partner go down and check the residence while I contacted for more information, contacted the reporting party.
Who was your partner at the time?
My partner at the time was Deputy Craig Heyer.
Heyer?
Heyer, it's H-Y-E-R.
And, well, whether it's before or after you contacted the reporting party, are you aware if Deputy Heyer did do a check of the residence in question?
Yes, sir, he did.
And did he inform you of making contact with anyone?
Said nobody was home.
Okay. So based on that, you continued your investigation?
Yes, sir.
And at some point, did you talk to the reporting party?
Yes, sir.
And who was that?
It was Michael McStay.
And was that in person or by phone?
At first it was by phone.
Okay. How did that play out? Tell us.
Contacted him, we went over some information. He said that he was going to be en route to Fallbrook. And I said, well, since you're already going to be coming down, let's go to meet at the substation so that we can go over all the details in question.
And at that time, did you get a lot of information from Mr. McStay?
I don't believe I got a lot of information. I believe I wanted to wait till he came down.
At some point, did he arrive at the station to meet with you?
Yes, sir, he did.
Do you happen to recall about what time?
I'd have to look at my report to see exactly what time, but I don't remember exactly what time he showed up now.
Do you know if you noted it in your report?
I don't think I did. I think I noted the actual time of call, but I know that it was in the afternoon and it wasn't in the evening yet.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said I believe it was in the afternoon, but I'm not 100% positive.
Okay. Do you have a copy of your report with you?
Yes, sir, I do.
Would you take a brief moment with the court's permission to review it and see if you did note the time that you met with Mr. McStay at the station?
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Thank you. Yes, sir, I did.
And what was that?
1400 hours, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
So 2 p.m.?
Yes, sir.
And when you met with Mr. McStay, how would you describe his emotional state or his personality at that time?
He seemed to be very articulate and very concerned for the welfare of his brother and the family.
Did he attempt, and did you attempt to get from him helpful information in helping locate his brother?
Yes.
And so I take you asked him a whole series of questions.
Yes, sir.
In general, what kind of questions?
Well, we just went over the fact of like when he had last contact with them, where he thought they might have gone. Has he tried calling them, and if he's gotten any response. He stated that he had went down to the house before, so I asked him if he had any contact then. Then we went over, how old the children were, how old the wife is, what kind of cars they drive. Just some things that we could try to search, because a lot of times what happens is people will report their loved ones missing, but then they're actually in custody. So those are kind of important questions before you start getting involved in putting everybody into the system as missing. You kind of want to check to make sure that they are within our custody or somebody's custody, because then they're not missing.
You didn't find any evidence that Joseph McStay or Summer McStay were in custody, did you?
No, sir, I did not.
Or Joseph Jr. or Gianni?
No, sir.
Okay. In talking with Mr. McStay and trying to get information such as date of last contact, spoke with, whatever, was Mr. McStay rock solid on dates when he gave them to you?
No, he wasn't rock solid on dates. It was kind of sort of these dates.
At some point in your conversation with Mr. McStay, were you able to actually determine a fixed point date that allowed you to work around?
Yes, sir.
And what date was that?
That would have been, can I refer to my report, please?
If it would refresh your recollection.
Yes, sir. February 4th through around February 4th, 2010, February 6th, 2010.
Okay, that doesn't sound like a rock solid date, though.
No.
Okay. Was there another date that you investigated that actually gave you a starting point?
I think that was when the vehicle was found towed, was what we went for as far as a rock solid date.
Gotcha. Okay, so not a range, it's an actual fixed point date. How did you find that out?
What I did is I ran what's called a registered to, so everybody that has a vehicle registered to them, we can locate that through our DMV database. So I had our dispatch run the names and then run what we call a reverse, which is check to see if there's anything registered to them. And we were able to find two vehicles registered to McStay's, and one of them being an Isuzu.
And what did you find out about that Isuzu?
It had been towed down at the border by Western Towing.
On what date?
On February 8th, 2010.
And did you, as part of your investigation, contact Western Towing?
I did.
For what purpose?
Well, I wanted to see, a lot of times what happens when vehicles are towed is there's obviously, in most scenarios, people are driving the vehicle or they're around the vehicle. So I wanted to see if there was a police report associated with the towing. A lot of tows are police officer tow cars. They have contract tows, Western Towing being one in San Diego County. And I just wanted to see if maybe there was any type of contact with them by a law enforcement agency or any type of documentation that would show where they were going or where they might be.
Did you find any?
It was not towed by a law enforcement agency.
Did you also actually inquire of Western Towing to verify something that would have been in the vehicle?
Yeah, I just asked them if there was anything in the vehicle pertaining to children or anything that would help out in this missing person scenario.
And were you provided any type of information you thought was helpful?
Yeah, they said there was a blanket over the back. I believe they said there was a couple car seats in the back.
And based on that, did you draw any conclusions, at least at that point?
Oh, I just, I don't know if I drew any conclusions except for the fact that there's a car that belonged to them that had the car seats in it.
Okay. Now that you found the Isuzu, did you do something to make sure it didn't go anywhere?
Yeah, I just told them not to release the vehicle until a detective contacted them.
Is that called putting a hold on it?
Yeah, a verbal hold.
A verbal hold?
Yeah, verbal hold.
And after talking to Mike, after finding the vehicle, what did you do next?
Well, then, after I received all that pertinent information, I wanted to go with Mr. McStay to the residence. He wanted to go check it out, so I told him I would go with him. We could check it out together.
Okay, what happened?
Well, then I followed him, or I drove down and he followed me, or I followed him. I can't remember if he was in front or back. But either way, we both went down to the residence to check the house.
What happened when you got to the house?
Well, once we got to the house, I had McStay, stated that he could check the residence and the back window was open, so he elected to go ahead and crawl through the window and open the front door for me.
Well, why did you have him do that?
Well, still at this point, I knew that he was reporting him missing, but just because someone reported missing, it doesn't give you a right to technically go into their house and start searching the house unless there's something that gives you that right. So in this scenario, just to keep things on, the side of no warrant or no information that's creating exigent circumstances, I wanted to make sure that legally we were covered as far as going to the house. And because he's a brother and he has permission to go in the house, and he stated that he's had permission to go in the house and has crawled into the window to the house, I elected to have him do it.
He indicated he had been in there before, right?
Yes, sir, he has.
Did he indicate when that was specifically?
It wasn't a concrete date.
Again, it wasn't a concrete date, but it was before.
Correct.
Okay. So you had him go in and let you in?
That is correct.
And how did that happen?
Well, then he went in the backyard, crawled through the window, and then I met him at the front door.
Did you go in the backyard with him?
I don't believe I did.
Okay, so you're assuming based on what he said that that's what he did is he went through a window.
Correct.
Okay, but you didn't see it personally.
I did not watch him crawl through the window.
So he comes to the front door and lets you in then?
Correct.
And then what? What do you do?
Well, then we do what's called a welfare check. I wanted to go in the house, just make sure that there wasn't any sign of, any blood or anything that just stuck out to be abnormal, since we are taking a missing person of 4, which is not normal. We don't do that very often, should I say. And so I wanted to go in and check and make sure there wasn't anything that we were missing as far as foul play or anything like that. Make sure that if there were people in there, that we could have, helped them if they needed help.
Okay, so what did you do?
We did a walkthrough of the residence, checking each room inside the residence
You
for any
said,
occupants.
I'm sorry, you said we. Did Mr. McStay go with you?
He was with me, yes.
Okay. Was it dark yet, or was it still somewhat light out, or?
I believe it was still somewhat light.
Okay, did you have to turn on lights in the house or use a flashlight?
No, I believe it was light. It was still bright enough for us to not have to do that.
Okay. And as part of that welfare check and cursory search, it wasn't a real in-depth search, was it?
No, we weren't going through drawers or anything like that. We're just basically looking in each room and checking the closet and the bathrooms and things like that to make sure that there wasn't anybody laying around needing help.
Let me back up a minute. Mr. McStay had told you he had been to the house previously.
That is correct.
And he still hadn't seen his brother or family or whatever. So at this point, why are you looking if he's already told you they're not there?
Because that's our job. We still need to go in and check. There's things that people miss when they're frantic, or things that they may not see that we see. We do go to training. We do these type of searches all the time. There's been times where even as law enforcement, we've gone into houses, searched for people, and missed them. So it wasn't a discredit, Mr. McStay. It was to go in and verify for myself that there was, in fact, nobody in the house, so that when we document these incidences, it's the true fact.
Okay. When you did that, did you take some photographs of some of the things you observed at that time?
I did.
Were you trying to be thorough?
I was trying to do the best I could, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, did you take 100 photographs or like 5 or 10?
I took a few.
Just a few.
Yeah, like 5 or 6.
Okay. So I'm going to start, and we're just going to walk through them real quick to give us your perspective when you saw them. Starting with exhibit, let's make sure we do these in order. They're not in order. Yes, exhibit number 11. Can you describe what you see in that photograph?
So you had a chair, a desk, a computer, small kid's chair, a light.
And how do you recognize it?
It's a photo that I took in the case when I entered the residence.
And is it, I'm sorry if I got distracted, is that a fair and accurate depiction as you saw it that day?
Yes, sir.
Let's put it up on the screen so we can all see it. And it looks like the desk lamp is on. Do you recall that being on when you saw it?
I couldn't tell you whether it was on or off, sir.
Okay.
I mean, in the picture, it appears that it's on, yes.
It obviously was when you took the photo.
Correct.
Do you remember it being turned on before you took the photo or turned off? Or?
I would have never turned it on to take the photo because I wouldn't depict the way I would have found it, so, but I don't remember it being on or off.
Okay. Exhibit number 12, do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
Yes, it's a small chair. Looks like another little desk with a chair and a light and a little basket.
Is that a fair and accurate depiction as you saw it that day?
Yes,
Is this one of the upstairs rooms?
I believe so.
Do you remember exactly which one?
I don't remember, no, sir.
Showing you exhibit number 13 for identification. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
Yes, small desk and what appears to be somewhat of an empty room.
Is that fair and accurate as you saw it when you were there?
Yes, sir.
And what is that big gray squarish roundish thing in the bottom right hand corner?
I don't really know. I think it was some type of couch or something. I'm not real sure.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm not sure. I think it was like a couch, some form of a couch or a bed or something. But I'm not sure.
Okay. Is it a sandbox?
I don't know.
Okay. I'm going to show you exhibit number 14 for identification. Do you recognize it?
Yes, it's a bedroom. I've got 2 beds on the floor and turned over a lamp.
Is it fair and accurate as you saw it that day?
Yes, sir.
You didn't knock the lamp over, right?
No, sir.
Did you really move or touch anything when you went through the house?
I don't touch anything when I go in.
Why is that?
There's no need to.
Okay. Show you exhibit number 15 for identification. Do you recognize that?
Yes, it's the bathroom with clothes on the counter.
Is it a fair and accurate depiction of what you saw that day?
Yes, sir.
In fact, I think you photographed yourself, didn't you?
Must have. Looks like it.
In the mirror?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Going back to 14, that window, it seems still pretty light out, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Still casting shadows?
Yes.
Exhibit number 16 for identification. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photo?
Yes, looks like a closet with clothing in it.
Is it a fair and accurate depiction as you recall seeing it that day?
Yes.
And last but not least, exhibit number 17 for identification. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
How do you recognize it?
That's a photo that I took standing at the top of the stairs, pointing down.
And is it a fair and accurate depiction as you saw it that day, right?
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask you, this right here, on the edge of the table, just under the edge of the photograph, do you know what that is?
I don't know what that is, mister.
It's not yours?
I don't know what it is.
Okay. Do you have a kind of a report writing clipboard box or clipboard or box that you use at the time?
I have two of them, yes. One's a black one, and I believe one is an orange one.
Do you recall bringing that into the house with you at that time?
I might have, but I don't recall.
So you cannot tell us whether that's your report right box clipboard or not?
I can tell you that I don't know for sure. The likelihood of it being mine is pretty high. If it's not there in any other pictures, it's probably mine.
So these pictures were all taken on the 15th, correct?
The date that we went in there, yes.
Okay. So, what did you do at this point?
At this point, after the photos were taken and we did the walkthrough, I contacted our homicide supervisor.
Okay. Okay, so let me ask you this. Did you see anything that was just an obvious sign of a struggle?
Obvious sign of struggles, I did not see anything that I believe to be obvious signs of struggle.
Well, a knocked over lamp could be, right?
Could be actually reading.
But it didn't stick out to you, you're saying?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you see any obvious signs of blood, tissue, dead bodies, anything like that?
No, sir.
What else would you look for?
Blood on the walls, door jams, broken glass, maybe broken windows, things that that would normally be what you might believe to be out of place, maybe something near the front door, like as they're getting dragged out, something just to that effect.
Was this normal?
Can you
Sorry.
go further into the question, please?
You didn't see any of those things,
No, sir.
but you called homicide.
Yes, sir.
So if this was not normal, why'd you call homicide?
Well, for several reasons. One, when we did go in, it appeared that there was plates of food that were half eaten and just left, and they weren't picked up or moved. People who have families, normally after they're done eating, will at least take their dishes to the sink or counter, or somebody will pick them up. It's a missing family of 4, which is not something that's reported on a daily basis, which strikes to have a little concern as far as, maybe something is going on. The information that I had received from Mr. McStay was that something was not right, something was going on. There was just something not jiving. So when we did the walkthrough of the house, I noticed that they weren't fully unpacked. It didn't appear that it was a fully furnished home. It appeared that whoever was there, in my mind, had just got up and left, which just raised suspicion. It didn't seem like that would be something normal. So to cover my bases as far as making sure that we crossed our T's and dotted our I's, I contacted our homicide sergeant, because anything that goes further than 10 days, they receive for follow-up and further investigation. So I wanted to let them know what we had to see if they wanted me to do anything else with the incident, or if they wanted to respond out and assess the situation for themselves.
What's this 10-day rule timing frame?
So for us at the San Diego Sheriff's Department, once a missing person report is taken, after 10 days, it goes to our homicide team.
So homicide would have become involved eventually 10 days later after your report if they didn't come out that night.
They would automatically receive the report, yes.
And what kind of response did you get when you contacted the homicide team?
Once I briefed the supervisor on the incident, he said we will be right out.
And so what did you do?
Well, at that point, the scene is locked down, so we stop our investigation. I'm not going through the house any further. I called for additional units. I believe the only thing that was requested was an area canvas, but to go ahead and secure the scene, and conduct the area canvass. So that's what we did.
What's an area canvas?
Area canvass is when something that's done a lot of times when our homicide team comes out. We contact all the neighbors, get their information, write their names down, date of birth, phone numbers, see if they see anything, check to see if there's any cameras in the area, those kind of things. We have what's called a area canvas worksheet that's provided to the entire department from the homicide team that has the information on it that they would like to see. And then once those are done, those are turned over to the homicide team, and that's what they utilize to recontact in their investigation any information or pertinent information that may be on those sheets.
So, were you still inside the house, or were you back outside the house when you contacted the homicide on-call sergeant?
I believe I was still in the house when I contacted them.
Okay, and once he gave you that information of, hey, we're going to come out, what did you do?
Well, at that point, I believe I let Mr. McStay know that our homicide team was coming out, that, they can go stand by his car. We're going to go ahead and secure the scene, and then we would keep them updated. I then notified a few other deputies, I believe, to respond out because we were going to need to do an area canvass.
And when you asked for help to do an area canvass, did you get that help?
With the resources that we have, yes.
Would that be one other deputy?
I believe it was 2 deputies total.
Okay. So you got help and an area canvass was done?
Correct.
Are you aware of any significant, relevant information that was divined from that area canvass?
Not at that point in time.
Okay. And so Mr. McStay was exited out of the house?
Correct.
You made sure no one else went into it at that point?
Correct.
At some point, did a homicide detective or team show up?
Yes.
And who was that?
I'd have to look at the names exactly, but it was one of our 4 homicide teams.
Okay. When they showed up, what did you do?
When they showed up, once they all arrived, then I did the brief, which
Okay.
is giving them all the information that I had received, that I know, and that I investigated, along with the canvas sheets.
So that would have included the identification. Would that have included the identification of the missing persons?
Yes.
Who the reporting party was?
Yes.
I'm talking about what your briefing would entail. Sorry. Your briefing would entail that information?
Correct. The briefing would entail everything that I did without leaving out anything, because that's what we need to do when homicide shows up, and make sure that they have everything that's going to be documented in the report.
Okay. So you would have informed them of locating the Isuzu trooper in the tow yard?
Yes.
You would have informed them of the timeline of squishy dates that Mr. McStay gave you?
Yes.
The area canvas results?
Yes. And those may have still been actually working on those as we were doing the brief, because we don't always finish those right away.
Do you do a premise history search for a location like this as part of that investigation?
Yes and no. Not everybody does a premise check. I don't know if I did a premise history check on this residence, but we do have that capability.
So let me ask you this. What is a premise history check?
A lot of times if we're responding to a domestic violence incident or a armed robbery situation or anything like that, we'll do what's called a premise check, which is how many times have we responded to this place. A lot of times we'll do maybe 6 months or 3 to 6 months. Dispatch will check the system to see how many times we responded to this location and what type of incidences we responded to for officer safety purposes. Sometimes that information will say last time we responded, subject had pointed a gun at somebody and subject was not at the location when deputies arrived. That's information that's good to know prior to getting to that location, because once again, we're going into volatile situations where people injure themselves, others, or even officers. So a premise history check is done on most of the time on any type of incident that's either a chronic issue place or a violent type of incident that you're responding to.
And how do you actually conduct that check? What is it done in?
So we don't, as deputies, actually do the premise check. It is done by our dispatch center. For us in San Diego County, with the Sheriff's Department, it's done out of Bridgehaven, San Diego. That's where dispatch center is. We will get on the radio and just request it as simple as that. Can you do a premise check on that residence, please? And they'll come back saying, we have nothing on that residence, or they'll say, we responded out there on this date at this time for this reason.
And if there is a history of responding to a residence, are you able to get a printed version of that history to review?
If we have the CAD numbers, which is our computer automated dispatch center form, which is any time an incident's entered into the system, then yes. But I've never done that personally.
Have you ever referred to them or reviewed them personally?
I have reviewed our CAD printouts, yes.
And do CAD printouts contain information that is generated at or near the time of the events that they record?
Yes.
And that is done, you mentioned dispatch, those are done by employees of the San Diego County Sheriff's Department?
That is correct. So what goes into our CAD entry can either be entered in via our computer on our vehicles, like if I'm clearing a call or if I'm adding notes into the call, I can type it into the computer, hit send, and it'll attach to this CAD. But dispatch can also do the same thing. So any information coming in, if I get on the radio and I say, subject just ran northbound on 2nd Street, dispatch will type it in and it'll be on CAD. So when I go back to print out CAD, I can look at it and say at 15:45 hours, subject ran northbound on 2nd Street. And it'll just continue that all the way through your incident. Now some incidences have a lot of information, some have very little.
Okay, so let me show you a couple exhibits real quick.
Actually, before you do that, why don't we go ahead and take our afternoon recess, 15 minutes, keep in mind the admonitions previously given to you, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case. We'll see everyone back in about 15 minutes.